going somewhere. Ruth and Edna's father worked at the pickle factory, where he sliced pickles all day long. Upon high school graduation, Ruth and Edna's two older sisters went to work at the same pickle factory. There, Virginia and Mildred diligently packed olives into glass jars, pimento side out, all day long. The morning of Edna's high school graduation, Edna slammed her fist on the kitchen table, upending Ruth's teacup. Ruth sat back in her chair, steadied her breath. She loved having a sister prone to eruptions that burst dreams and supplied the energy lived right into those dreams. Ruth felt certain this latest outburst would be a doozy. Edna did not disappoint. She stretched her 5'10" frame toward the peeling yellow ceiling, leaned into her sister's face and said, "We aren't working at no pickle factory." Ruth's hair began to sweat. Edna continued, "We ain't stuffing no olives into no glass jars, pimento side out. Ruth, you and me, we're going somewhere." Edna paced the kitchen, peppering her march with excerpts from her latest vision. "I'm a kid wrangler." Ruth nodded. Edna did hold a neighborhood-wide reputation as a Pied Piper. Pied Piper of summer camps, mesmerizing even the naughty kids into playing cowboys and pirates. Edna raised her pointer finger and scolded out her latest scheme. "Ruth, today I'm walking right off that graduation stage and I'm marching myself directly into the admissions office of Harris University, enrolling myself to become a 4th grade teacher." She leaned across the old table and glared at Ruth. "And you, dear sister?" The question rang in Ruth's ears like a dare. She struggled to breathe. Her mind flooded with images of her childhood obsession, playing hospital, a daily melodrama starring little Ruth who, employing exotic medical interventions, saved the lives of well-bandaged baby dolls and teddy bears. With Edna's challenge unveiling this fantasy, Ruth lifted herself onto quivering legs and shouted, "Nurse!" Years of daydreams erupting into one word, and exhausted by naming this most intimate truth, she fell back onto her chair, placed her head on the table, and sobbed. And so it was. With Edna installed at Teachers College, Ruth descended her own high school graduation stage, caught the Grand Avenue streetcar, and enrolled at Lutheran Hospital School of Nursing. She graduated valedictorian of her class, and 3 months later, with Edna already teaching 4th grade, Ruth found herself in charge of the hospital's general medicine ward. She managed that ward until her extraordinary darning and embroidery skills caught the eyes of the hospital surgeons. Like aunts admiring Ruth's divinely embroidered tablecloths and tea cozies, the consensus among the hospital surgeons was this: nobody works a needle like Ruth. And it was true. Her delicate stitches healed into lovely pink lines, which over time faded into barely detectable white creases. Delighted patients lifted their shirts and their pants legs, gushing, "Look, Doc, bet even you can't find the scar." To a man, each surgeon accepted full credit for Ruth's gift. Her needlework made them look so grand that they nicknamed her the Closer. And thus, day and night, facing human messes made by car crashes, motorcycle accidents, bullet wounds, the emergency surgical team paged Ruth, their closer, to polish the scars. On December 8th, 1941, the day after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, Ruth moved the radio from the living room shelf to the center of the kitchen table, where it would sit for the next 4 years. There, Ruth and her parents listened to President Roosevelt declare war. Her father, ashen, head in his hands. Her mother, stone cold, white-nailed fingers clamped around a coffee cup. With Ruth and Virginia and Mildred down at the pickle factory packing olives, and Edna off at school comforting students, Ruth sat with her parents and absorbed the horror. During that infamous speech, Ruth's eyes landed on the stump of her father's ring finger. The top 2 joints had been sliced off in a pickle factory, but only now, only in this frightful moment, did Ruth imagine the gushing blood and hear her father's gut-wrenching screams. Her nurse's heart cracked open to a beach filled with broken, bleeding soldiers. "I'm joining the Red Cross," she announced. Her father slammed his fist on the table. "Hell you are, girl!" he glared at her. "They'll send you to that damn mess in Africa, and I won't have Rommel's animals." And he didn't finish that sentence. But Ruth didn't skip a beat. "If not the Red Cross, I'm joining the Army." Her eyes met her father's. Finally resigned, he whispered, "At least Uncle Sam will keep you safe." They sat quietly for a moment. Then he reached across the table and he gently stroked his daughter's cheek. "My girl, an Army nurse. Imagine that." Losing pounds she couldn't spare and gaining muscle she did not want, Ruth completed basic training. Military orders sent her to Dibbles General Hospital in California, where she reprised her expert role as the closer. At Dibbles, the surgical teams worked long hours, inventing healing paths for bodies so torn up that medical textbooks were of no use. Long days, week after week. Some surgical victories were so sweet that she'd replay them, draped on her dormitory bed, rubbing sore, swollen feet. After 12 hours of surgery, an 18-year-old soldier would walk again, and someday, somewhere, Ruth knew he'd make somebody search for his faded scars. That same evening, Patty's bossy voice blasted over their bedsheet wall. Patty's nightly broadcast featuring hospital gossip. "There's this guy from St. Louis, shot twice, intercarpal joint in right forearm with interserosis membrane involvement." "Ruth, you're from St. Louis." Ruth sneered. Who had time for romance? She rolled onto her side and laced her arms and legs around her pillow, and then she remembered. One afternoon on the beach with a guy, William, blue eyes, black hair, Will. Just whispering his name made her heart race. A game of beach volleyball. Patty borrowed the suits. Ruth was way too tight and way too low cut, and therefore perfect. To this revealing ensemble, the dark-haired, brown-eyed beauty added red nails and red lips. 4 skimpily clad nurses, complete magnets for 6 half-nude flyboys. Naval pilots on leave from an aircraft carrier headed to the Pacific. She and Will eyed each other. Throughout the whole game, Will nicknamed her Lieutenant Dish. Thick, salty ocean air, bodies glistening in the warm sun, slipping and sliding in the sand, screaming with laughter. Patty spiked the ball into the ocean. Ruth sprinted after it with Will at her back. The two of them crashed into the waves, tumbling. Will surfaced with Ruth in his arms. The rescue she did not need filled her body in goosebumps. Another wave caught Will, spilling them both, arms and legs flying into a fierce embrace and finally depositing them on the shore. Tangled together, they laughed until, with eyes locked, they kissed. A delicious kiss that capped Ruth's first genuinely romantic date. The next day, Will sailed into the Pacific, and Ruth returned to closing wounds. Ruth took a deep breath and kissed her pillow passionately. Those moments, excuse me, those moments with Will, her cells tingled with the memory of their bodies touching, salty lips kissing, a tenderness so thrilling that she promised herself that she would do all of that again, someday, somewhere. Patty was still blabbing on. So Ruth, I told the guy from St. Louis he could catch you between scrubs. I know you don't have time, but it's the least. Patty droned on. Ruth closed her eyes and dreamed. He's here, Patty announced. She pulled off Ruth's surgical cap, releasing clusters of damp, tangled curls. Ruth raised her gloved arms in the air like a cactus. Who? She squinted. Patty pulled down Ruth's mask. The guy from St. Louis. Oh, yeah. Ruth groaned, pulling off her gloves. The intercarpal joint, right forearm shaft with interserosus membrane involvement. I've got like 5 minutes. And she gritted her teeth. Now I'm going to have to re-scrub. Patty pushed Ruth out into the hallway where the soldier waited. He offered Ruth his left hand because his right was in a sling. You can drop the intercarpal joint thing. I'm just Elmer. Just Elmer, Ruth repeated, teasing. Ruth liked the smile that took over most of his face and how his enormous brown eyes sparkled when he talked and even more when he listened. She explained that she only had a few minutes, her focus still on a massive facial wound. They had saved the soldier's eye, but it would take some fancy darning to save his smile. With little time, they talked in fragments. Battle of the Bulge. Days freezing in a frozen foxhole. Blocking pain with dreams of home. They slipped easily into that liminal space where they'd been living, lives interrupted in the ugly goo of war, slipping into tiny dark moments they never tell another living soul, lamenting how war demanded the impossible, ordering him to kill and expecting her to fix. She stretched the interlude for as long as she could until she was called back into surgery and they were forced to go their separate ways. After a long day in the operating room with a soldier's smile saved, Ruth returned to the nurse's dorm. Passing the picture window that overlooked the hospital exercise yard, she heard the steady bounce of a basketball on the pavement. With the afternoon sun painting the sky lavender and pink, there he was, the guy from St. Louis, shooting baskets with one good arm. Ruth pressed her weary head against the cool glass and studied him. Tall, thin, thick head of brown hair, muscles nicely sculpted, now peppered with sweat and distinctly on display in that pea green sleeveless army undershirt. White clouds of her breath dotted the window pane. She thought, this one's beautiful. She watched him dunk basket after basket, cringing with every shot, and determined. And suddenly, there it was, head to toe, her body tingling with a yearning so deep that she understood Will chasing her into the waves. The chemistry lesson on desire. Chase the one you want. This one, the guy from St. Louis, the fractured arm guy, that was the one she wanted. She wanted to touch, wanted to kiss, and she promised herself that she would. Right after morning rounds, she'd find him. She'd take the dry cleaning bag off her sassy blue dress, the one that danced at the top of her knees, and she would lace the red silk scarf through her curls, and she'd dust off her old pumps, and with a few dabs of Patty's Chanel No. 5, she'd go and find him. But when she arrived at his bedside, she found a stripped mattress and an empty cubby. Reaching the door too late, she watched a ribbon of dust trailing the army bus lights. She sent letters. They came back marked, return to sender. The war ended and the operating rooms emptied. Discharged from active duty, Lieutenant Ruth hopped a cargo plane for St. Louis and reprised her role as the closer on Lutheran Hospital's trauma team. Edna turned down pleas to leave her 4th grade classroom for a principalship, bought a car, and then learned to drive. Freed by wheels, Edna and Ruth spent their weekends exploring the world. One Saturday afternoon, Edna danced into the kitchen, a wild glint in her eyes. Nat King Cole's playing down at the club plantation. And guess who's going? Edna tap danced around, her sister waving the tickets. Ruth hopped to her feet. Edna juggled the car keys. One tiny glitch, sis. We're taking the streetcar because old Leapin' Lena needs a lube job. As the sisters waited for the Del Mar Boulevard streetcar on that muggy September afternoon, Ruth spotted a guy racing down the hill, yelling and flailing his arms, seemingly desperate to catch the streetcar. Ruth caught the eye of the conductor, who opened the door and nodded that he would wait for the runner. As the guy sprinted closer, Ruth felt a tinge of recognition. She squinted, setting her eyes on that dashing figure. Her body began to shake as it dawned on her. I know this guy. It's the intercarpal, the one-armed basketball player. Coming closer, arms still flying, she could hear him. He was not yelling for the streetcar. He was shouting, Ruth! Ruth! And looking as stunned as if he'd seen a ghost. Ruth shook her head in disbelief. It's him, all right. Tall, sandy-haired, massive smile plastered over that sweet face, dreamy brown eyes. Goosebumps ran down her neck and up her arms as she recalled balancing her head against that hospital window, watching this guy toss baskets, promising herself that. And she realized she was wearing that sassy blue dress. And that red scarf was laced through her hair. And her neck was dabbed with Chanel No. 5. Only the heels were new. She kicked off those pumps and tore down the sidewalk as if headed for home base, flying directly into his open arms. He lifted her. They twirled and laughed, dizzy with wonderment. When they stopped spinning, Ruth placed her cherry-laced fingers on his cheeks and kissed him. One pillow-practiced, way overdue kiss. Already on the streetcar, Edna was huddled next to the conductor, and the two of them were grinning thick as thieves. "Do you know that guy?" the conductor asked Edna. And Edna, who would have sworn that she knew everything there was to know about Ruth, sighed, "I don't know at all. I have no idea." Elmer, fearing that this moment might be a delusion, clutched Ruth's hands. "I can't believe it's you." "And you," Ruth teased, "the intercarpal right forearm shaft with interserosus membrane involvement." He smiled toward just Elmer, "But Lieutenant, you can call me whatever you want." She glowed, "Well, I like just Elmer." "Ruth," he asked, "are you going somewhere?" She looked down at her hands, now cupped in his. "Why, yes, Elmer, I am going somewhere." "Well then," Elmer swallowed hard, his voice cracking, "I'm going somewhere too." Holding her hand, he helped Ruth step onto the Delmar Boulevard streetcar, and they went somewhere together. Thank you.